I'm Sylvia Gonzalez Pizana, Villa Finale's Manager of Collections and Interpretation, and I want to welcome you back to part 2 of A Witness to Change, the story of Villa Finale. In part 1, we left off with the boom San Antonio was experiencing with its growing population, the arrival of the railroad in 1877, and the beginning of the streetcar line, not to mention the construction boom in places like the city's King William neighborhood. There was prosperity nationwide, with an explosion of land purchases, migration, and construction of railroads. But the prosperity bubble burst in 1893. A financial panic began due to massive overbuilding and shaky financing of railroads by many banks. Banks failed, causing the greatest recession in history up to that point. Big business, especially banks, were seen as the villains of the day, as illustrated by the poster for the War of Wealth melodrama on this slide. Very few were immune to the consequences of the recession, including Edwin Polk, Villa Finale's second owner. On this slide is a clipping of San Antonio's directory showing Polk's name and the home's address as 407 King William. Polk had invested a lot of money on improvements to the property and also owed back taxes, so the recession hit him especially hard. Polk lost the house through foreclosure in December 1895. After refusing to leave the property after it sold to the highest bidder, the Polks were charged with causing over $500 in damages to the property, or nearly $16,000 today. Following the legal issue with the Polks, the property was sold to Colonel Isaac Ike Pryor and his wife Myra. Just like Edwin Polk before him, Ike Pryor had been a successful cattleman, but the introduction of barbed wire and the extension of the railroads marked the end of the Texas cattle trails era. A self-made man, by the age of 20, Pryor had become a trail boss, and by 22, he owned 20,000 acres of land. But just like other cattlemen, he suffered great losses to his herds in the late 1880s. However, Pryor was a smart businessman. He borrowed money on his good name to invest in the Texas and Colorado Land and Cattle Company, while his wife Myra, who had her own fortune, put the down payment on the Norton House, now known as Villa Finale. This was smart because it protected the house from any possible lawsuits or foreclosures involving her husband. Concluding the Spanish-American War of 1898, the Pryors made a fortune shipping live cattle for spot sale in Cuba. In 1901, they purchased 100,000 acres in Zavala County. This would become the town of La Pryor, and the house was sold to another former cattleman, Dillard Rucker Fant. At the top of this slide at the far right, you can see the house outlined on its lot with outbuildings, some of which no longer exist. The Pryors had added the home's familiar tower and arched front porch and balcony, and before them, Edwin Polk had added the rear wing. Essentially, the house looked the way it does today by 1901, when D.R. Fant and his wife, Lucille, moved in. It should be noted, Fant is credited with extending the Chisholm Trail to Corpus Christi, in addition to financing railroads and public schools. A philanthropist, Lucille was deeply involved in promoting education among the city's Latino community. The Fant family's ownership of the property marks the first time we see photographs of the home with its owners. Villa Finale would like to thank Patsy White, great-granddaughter of Dillard Fant, for these valuable photographs. You can see in these snapshots the home, including the front perimeter fence, looks exactly as it does today. Sadly, the Fant's ownership was short-lived. Dillard Fant was troubled by debt and found himself as a defendant in a number of legal cases involving money. In 1904, he nearly lost the home to one P.P. Garcia, but in 1906, the Bexar County Court ruled lien rights on the property were held by others, including in part Ike and Myra Pryor. Unfortunately, 2 years after the case was settled, Dillard Fant died while on a visit to Goliad, and Lucille Fant sold her rights to the property to a widow named Eva T. Bruff in September 1908. What was happening in the rest of the city during this time? The streetcar, which began in 1878 with vehicles pulled by mules, then horses, was electrified in 1890 with a power plant for the line on the corner of what is now Cesar Chavez and Flores Streets, a few blocks away from Villa Finale. Streetcar service had been extended down Flores to the San Antonio and Aransas Pass Depot in what is now the South Alamo and Flores Street area in 1884. By 1905, the city saw wide paving of downtown streets to accommodate the automobile, the first of which was sold in San Antonio in 1902. By the turn of the 20th century, San Antonians also began to be concerned with beautification projects around the city, especially where the beloved San Antonio River was concerned. Its waters, which had been crystal clear, were now slow-moving, murky, and polluted, thanks in large part to the construction of wells that impacted the spring flows. In 1910, the Civic Improvement League began to beautify sections of the river through the planting of flowers and greenery. In 1912, Mayor Augustus H. Jones made beautification of the river a top priority of his administration. Just 1 mile south of downtown along the San Antonio River, the King William neighborhood slowly began to see some changes. If you may recall, Lucille Fant had sold the house to a widow named Eva T. Bruff in 1908. Bruff was remarried to a man named Dwight Potter. The Potters renamed the home Norwood, and as you can see here, the house appeared in the book San Antonio, the City of Beautiful Homes during their ownership. However, by this time, many of King William's oldest residents began to move away from downtown to newer subdivisions. Better and faster transportation, like the automobile, made this possible. The Potters themselves exchanged their home in October 1917 for the Turner Hotel in Oklahoma, with a deal made with the Bacon Investment Company. Immediately, Bacon Investment was sued by a man named J. H. Compton, who claimed he was the agent who had recruited the Potters to complete the transaction for the Turner Hotel. In the lawsuit, Compton claimed he should have received 2.5% commission for the transaction, or $1,500, which he never had. This is well over $30,000 today. Bacon Investment failed to show up in court. Compton won his case, and the judge ordered a lien placed on the house as part of the judgment. Once again, the property found itself in dispute of ownership. That is the end of Part 2. In Part 3, we will cover the outbreak of the First World War, the devastating flood of 1921, and Villa Finale's most infamous owner. Until next time.